name's Paige, and today I'm here to tell you all how to direct a live stage show. Now imagine, it's opening night of your production. You're sitting in the back row, and as the curtains open, your mind flashes through the memories of the last couple months. You know exactly what happens in the show, and you'll know if something goes wrong, but you have no power over anything. Directing a live show is really difficult, and it takes a lot of steps. The first of those steps is to choose a script. Now when you're choosing a script, the first thing you have to keep in mind is your audience. Obviously, if you are doing a show for a group of kindergartners, you might have a different script than if you're doing a show for some elderly people. So that's really important because you don't want your audience to be offended or bored. The next thing to consider is the funding. There are some scripts that are just outright expensive to buy, and also there are some scripts that are really technically demanding, which cost a lot of money as well. So if you're low on funds, keep that in mind and maybe pick a show that doesn't have those aspects. The next thing to consider is the length of the show. This kind of goes back to the audience. You want to make sure that the length of your show is appropriate so that your audience doesn't get bored, fall asleep, or leave thinking that the show was way too short. The venue is the next thing you have to consider. Choosing a script has a lot to do with the area where you'll be performing. You have to make sure that the script fits where you'll be performing, or else you might have conflicts with that. And one of the most important things to consider is your cast and crew pool. Although I think it's bad to pre-cast in your head, you do need to have a general understanding of the people that you might have come in audition so that you know you'll have the people that you need. So if you're doing a show of King Lear and you need an 80-year-old man, but you're performing it in a high school, that might not be the best idea. The next step is to learn the script. Now when you're learning the script, you have to know every single aspect of that script. Every line, every character, everything. You have to know the ins and outs of all of the people involved, so that when people come to you and ask questions as their leader, you can answer them. You have to know the relationships between characters, the relationships between set items, the relationships between everything, so that you can guide your performers and your technicians in completing your show. Also, I think it's a good idea to start envisioning your production, because the further ahead of time you get a general idea of the look you might want, the more whole your product is in the end. Lastly, you need to take notes. The first time reading your script, you should just read through it, get a feel for it, and decide if it's what you want to do. But after that, you need to take intense notes on every thought that pops in your head on every aspect, or else you might forget something and then the show will suffer. The next step is to design the set. The set determines the movement and the energy of the entire show, so it's really important to get it right. When designing the set, you need to keep in mind the venue. Obviously, if you're in a circular theater, you can't have a square set unless you want it to be much smaller. You need to keep in mind the script. If there are certain things mentioned in the script, you have to make sure that they're on stage, or else you'll leave your audience puzzled as to why there's no fireplace when there are marshmallows roasting on the fireplace. You have to remember the technical needs, such as lighting and sound and special effects. Things like that are very important. If you have things blocking light, that can be a big problem. And then also things like, if you need a trap door, you need to make sure you have somewhere you can place that, or else you'll run into a big problem later. The next step is to design the blocking. The blocking is the way that characters and props move around on stage. It helps move the script along, so it's very important to get it right. It can be used to influence the energy of the show and the tension between characters, and also focal points on stage. Believe it or not, there are instances where you can have someone walk on stage and no one even see them because you have the focus somewhere else, which can be really helpful. The next step is to design a rehearsal schedule. It's very important to design this before actors and technicians are introduced, or else you'll end up working your schedule around theirs, and that's just too many people to work around, and it ends up being you don't get enough time or other aspects like that. This determines when things are going to be completed, so that's things like the set, the sound, memorizing lines, things like that, so that you stay on schedule and finish everything on time. It also says when and where rehearsal will take place. That way, all of your performers and technicians know exactly when to be at each place, and so they have no excuse for showing up late or not showing up at all. This also determines who can and can't be cast. So if you have a rehearsal schedule that goes straight through January and you have performers who want to be gone for all of January, you might have to consider not casting them in that role just because they can't be here for a huge chunk of the rehearsals. The rehearsal schedule has to be followed. It can be hard sometimes because things do go off schedule and you have to adjust to that, but in general, not sticking to a rehearsal schedule can only lead to chaos and not getting things done. The next step is to create an audition information packet. This can include a script or rehearsal schedule and any kind of special needs you might need for your show. This will be given out to people who are considering auditioning or considering being involved in your show so that they know exactly what's expected of them and exactly what they might be doing. After you've done all that is the most fun part, which is to cast the show. It's a very important step because even if your show isn't going great, if you have really great actors who love to work with each other and love to work with you, it's pretty easy to turn things around. The first thing is to hold auditions and decide who will be involved in your production. Now when you're doing this, there are a lot of things to keep in mind. The first is the talent of the people auditioning. If you have someone who doesn't really know what they're doing and just doesn't have a feel for the stage yet, it might not be a great idea to cast them in a lead. So you have to keep that in mind. You also have to remember the capability they have to perform certain roles. So no matter how talented a 16-year-old boy is, he can't perform the role of a 30-year-old man. It just can't be done. It's too much of a stretch, and audiences are much smarter than you think. You can also keep in mind their previous experience. Now this is something that you can have a little leeway with because even if they're not very experienced, they could do fantastic at the role. But it is good to cast your leads with some stage experience so that they don't freak out on opening night or drop out of the show because they can't handle the pressure. Now, the most important thing, in my opinion, on casting is to make sure that the people that you cast will work well with each other and work well with you. It is almost impossible to have a good rehearsal process if you have certain cast members who aren't working the way they should or aren't showing up for rehearsals or are causing conflicts backstage. It's just never good. So if you have a cast that's all really working together and really working towards one goal, you can really have a great show. The next step is just to complete that process. Follow your rehearsal schedule. It should have every step along the way. It's kind of like a guide map to your show. So if you follow all of those, you should get there on time. You need to complete all of your technical and artistic tasks, whether they're last minute or where they came into your head the first time you read the script. If you want it in your show, that's something that has to be completed before opening night. A very important thing that's very hard for some directors because it takes a lot of power away from you is to make adjustments as needed. There will be things that you have to change, and that's hard to realize sometimes, but the picture that you have in your head at the beginning of the show might be changed by something later on, and you have to be flexible and realize that that will happen, and you need to adjust to that so that your show can be the best that it can be. All that's left to do after that is to sit back, relax, and enjoy your creation. Believe it or not, this can be one of the hardest steps in the process because at this point, your work is done, you have nothing else to do, and all you can do is sit there and watch other people perform your work. If things go wrong, you know it. If things go right, you know it. If actors change lines in the middle of the show, you know it. So it's very challenging, but in general, it's a very rewarding experience. It's hard, but in the end, you get a lot out of it, and I really recommend it to anyone. Thank you.